Hidden story of the financial crisis that nobody really talks about, is actually quite simple, is that because there was a shortage of T-bills, because in fact many of them were in China, because they keep buying a lot of them, we started to use AAA mortgage products as collateral for short-term financial deals in the repo markets. As the housing crisis happened, those bonds that made up those instruments fell from AAA to B to C. At that time, that meant that if you were a heavily leveraged financial organization, a Bear Stearns, for example, and you were using these things as pledges and as repo collateral, as they fell value, you had to use more and more of them to borrow the same amount of money. Unfortunately, you couldn't do that because there's a fixed stock of the assets and they're hugely levered. This meant a 3% return against their asset base rendered them effectively insolvent. Once everybody figured this out, you shout fire in a crowded theatre, everybody freaks out, heads for the exits, you get a liquidity crunch, you get into a financial crisis. We decided to bail out the system rather than let it fail because it was too big to fail. The costs of doing so were basically a 30% drop in tax revenue across the OECD countries because the financial sector becomes so big, particularly in the United States and the United Kingdom, that it was generating huge amounts of taxes. At the same time, the economy slows down as the liquidity crunch hits the real economy and affects lending and borrowing and spending. Consumer expenditures trend down as do consumer expectations, as do investment expectations. You get caught in a slump. Once you get caught in a slump, automatic transfers in the economy mean that benefits go up at the same time as tax revenues go down. So you're going to have a bigger deficit. As you have a bigger deficit, you multiply that over time, you issue more debt, you go from 61% to 100% debt to GDP. That's why we're here. Now here's the inequity of the put in this whole thing. Why is it that Social Security, which isn't even part of federal budget calculations on the deficit, which by the way has a $2.3 trillion surplus, that has to be cut so we can pay back the debt accrued by bailing out some of the richest people in our society and insuring their assets? Does anybody else think that's total horseshit? Because I really do. And that's why I wrote this book. Now, here's the weird thing. We're actually not in that much of a mess. It's been a sticky recovery, it's been a technological shock to a lot of service jobs that we didn't expect, etc. But nonetheless, we haven't been cutting, and because of that, federal deficit's projected to be around 3% next year, even with the margin of error in the projections, say 4%. Britain has its own currency, like us, and has been cutting, has been doing austerity. Having done that, it's now looking at 7% totally sclerotic growth and a possible triple-dip recession. Europe has been cutting like there's no tomorrow. They've got the leeches on the corpse and they're opening up the veins. Greece has lost 30% of GDP in 4 years. The German army didn't manage that between 41 and 45. That's how much damage has been done by this. So the question is the following. Why is it that Europe, particularly the European Union, the part that we think of as the most kind of, if you will, welfare state-ish, friendly, transfer, etc., suddenly became this huge doomsday device for this enormous experiment on austerity, which so far has cost around 30% of GDP in the periphery and has generated 25 million extra unemployed in comparison to the United States? Because this is about saving Société Générale, and it is about saving Deutsche Bank from their own over-borrowing and over-lending mistakes. Consequences. You can't solve a banking problem with budget cuts. You can cut Greece's public spending to Neolithic levels. It's not going to make a damn bit of difference to SocGen's balance sheet. You can't run a gold standard in the democracy. We tried this in the 1920s. It really didn't work too well. Ended up with a few political parties that were kind of nasty. You can't solve a solvency problem with a liquidity instrument, but God bless Mario, he's been trying. You just add enough liquidity and hope the problem goes away by saying, I'll do whatever it takes. That's what he said 6 months ago. All the yields came down. Since then, he's actually done nothing. And yet the yields have gone down, proving one thing. It's about the credibility of bank policy. It's not about cutting the budget. The markets aren't craving an extra 30,000 civil servants being thrown out of work in Greece. They're worried about the euro breaking up. So once you give a credible guarantee, you do a Bernanke light, all of the market pressures are relieved. That was what was lacking all the whole time. And the most important one is you can't all cut at once and expect to grow. And expect to grow. Why not? Because in order to save, you need to have income from which to save. So if everybody's simultaneously cutting, nobody's generating income. So imagine the economy with an 80% debt to GDP ratio. Turn it into a simple fraction of 4 over 5. Now imagine if 40% of the 5 is government expenditure. You want to cut it in half. You're really going to credibly commit to cut the budget. So you just turned that into 4 over 4. On a constant stock of debt, your debt to GDP ratio just went from 0.8 to 1. Every single country that's undergone an austerity program now has more debt than when they started. Any country that hasn't cut, including the United States, now has proportionately less.